Do you genuinely truly believe that authentic enduring power is primarily measured in the fragile currency of words? Is it gauged by the sheer volume of shouts, the decibel level of pronouncements? Is it won in the perceived, often Pyrrhic victory of contentious, ego-driven arguments? Do you operate as most do under the common, deeply ingrained, yet fundamentally flawed assumption that the individual who successfully, consistently raises their voice the loudest, who aggressively, visibly imposes themselves most forcefully upon others, is inherently, undeniably the one who truly dominates the situation, the one who holds the reins of power? And if so, then understand this clearly, unequivocally, and prepare for a potential paradigm shift. They have fundamentally lied to you. They, society, with its endless chatter, conventional wisdom with its glorification of extroversion, perhaps even your own ingrained, unexamined conditioning from a lifetime of observing superficial power plays, have skillfully, almost hypnotically made you believe that the world, its rewards, its influence, inherently belongs to those individuals who refuse to keep silent, who constantly, relentlessly assert themselves verbally, who fill every available space with the sound of their own voice, when in stark, often uncomfortable yet ultimately liberating reality, true, enduring, almost invisible power often lies precisely paradoxically in possessing the profound wisdom, the unwavering discipline, and the strategic acumen to know when not to speak at all. Have you ever paused, truly paused, to consciously realize, to critically examine how many times a day, a week, a lifetime you find yourself instinctively, almost compulsively trying to justify yourself, offering elaborate, often unnecessary explanations even when none are truly required, none are genuinely sought? How frequently do you feel that almost irresistible internal itch, that compulsive need to respond immediately to meticulously correct perceived inaccuracies, however trivial, to vehemently, passionately defend your point of view, your opinion, your ego, as if your very life, your core identity, your fundamental sense of worth somehow depended precariously on winning that specific, fleeting verbal skirmish? You likely think, as most, are conditioned to that by engaging in this constant, often exhausting verbal activity, you are effectively demonstrating your intelligence, projecting undeniable strength, maintaining unwavering control over your environment and perceptions. But the often uncomfortable, deeply inconvenient truth is profoundly, starkly different. Every single time you speak without genuine strategic necessity, without a clear, considered purpose, without an awareness of its potential impact, you inadvertently, almost inevitably reveal the very opposite of strength. Perhaps a deep-seated insecurity, perhaps a reactive, unthinking nature, perhaps a desperate, gnawing need for external validation for someone, anyone to acknowledge your existence, your importance, your correctness. Strategic silence is the fundamental, often underestimated yet devastatingly potent tool, the unspoken weapon, the invisible shield, wielded by those rare individuals who truly deeply understand the intricate, often ruthless game of power and influence. Why? Because the one who possesses the inner strength, the unwavering composure to remain consciously, strategically silent, observes. They see what others lost in the noise of their own verbiage miss. The one who embraces silence as a deliberate strategy analyzes. They process information, discern patterns, identify vulnerabilities while others are merely reacting. The one who masters silence, who can inhabit it comfortably, powerfully, subtly, yet profoundly controls. Controls themselves first and foremost, controls the emotional temperature of the interaction, often almost invisibly controls the narrative, the perception, the very outcome. Conversely, those individuals constitutionally unable to remain silent, those driven by a compulsive, almost pathological need to constantly fill every perceived void with words, with noise, with their own opinions, are often unknowingly, tragically dominated by their own unchecked ego, perpetually enslaved by the incessant, insatiable need to be heard, to be validated, to be acknowledged, to feel important. And that state of being, that restless, reactive, word-driven existence far from representing genuine, sustainable power, ultimately, inevitably signifies profound, exploitable weakness. Look at any interaction, any potential conflict, any negotiation, any social dynamic through this critical, discerning lens. In every argument, in every verbal confrontation, in every power struggle, there typically exist two fundamental types of participants, two distinct operational modes. The first is the individual who primarily reacts, the one who allows themselves to be instantly, predictably carried away by fleeting emotion, a surge of anger, a sting of pride, a wave of fear, the one who speaks impulsively, defensively, without thinking strategically, without considering the long-term impact or the potential cost of their words. That individual, almost invariably, despite any temporary illusion of dominance, is the one who ultimately loses the deeper, more significant game of influence, often revealing far more than they gain. The second type, far rarer, far more potent, is the individual who consciously, deliberately chooses to primarily listen, to observe, to absorb. The one who possesses the remarkable, almost unnerving composure to patiently, strategically let the other person, the reactive one, exhaust themselves verbally, often tripping over their own words, revealing their own weaknesses, their inconsistencies, their underlying fears, their hidden agendas in their emotional, uncontrolled outpouring. The one who deliberately, consciously chooses their words, if they choose to speak at all, with almost surgical precision, with impeccable timing, with clear strategic intent. That individual, the master of strategic silence and calculated, impactful speech, is almost always the one who ultimately wins, securing their objective, maintaining their composure, preserving their energy, and often, paradoxically, gaining profound respect and unspoken influence in the process. Great thinkers, strategists, and masters of human dynamics throughout history have understood, often intuitively, this fundamental counterintuitive principle. Socrates, arguably the father of Western philosophy, the master of dialectic, rarely imposed his views directly or shouted down his opponents in the Athenian agora. Instead, he masterfully, patiently employed strategic questioning, the Socratic method skillfully planting seeds of doubt, guiding others through their own thought processes, and patiently, almost playfully allowed them to inadvertently, often embarrassingly, fall into their own logical traps to dismantle their own flawed arguments. Steve Jobs, a modern maestro of presentation persuasion and product evangelism, famously powerfully utilized dramatic, elongated silences during his iconic keynote addresses, making every carefully chosen, precisely delivered word he did utter carry the profound weight, the almost biblical authority of a definitive, unshakable sentence. Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary undefeated samurai swordsman, the author of the Book of Five Rings, profoundly knew and wrote that true combat mastery, true strategic dominance is won not solely through brute force, technical skill with the sword or aggressive posturing, but perhaps even more crucially, through unwavering patience, calculated strategy, the ability to read the opponent's mind, and the exercise of absolute, almost chilling control over one's own volatile, often treacherous, emotions. But most people simply don't understand this fundamental power-shifting principle. Most people, conditioned by a noisy, reactive world, instinctively, compulsively talk too much. They mistakenly, tragically believe that aggressively raising their voice, interrupting others, dominating the conversational airspace, somehow demonstrates power, authority, conviction, when in stark reality, all they are often doing is inadvertently, foolishly exposing their own underlying weaknesses, their hidden insecurities, their lack of emotional control, their desperate need for attention. Every extra unnecessary emotionally charged word uttered often functions as an unintentional revealing clue, a clue about who you truly are beneath the carefully constructed surface, a clue about what you secretly fear, what you desperately crave, a clue about what specific things, what particular words or actions reliably irritate, trigger, or destabilize you. And in the real, often competitive, sometimes predatory world, carelessly, consistently giving away crucial sensitive information about your inner state, your emotional vulnerabilities, is tantamount to strategically, foolishly giving away power, handing your opponents the very weapons they can use against you. Observe closely with a discerning, almost anthropological eye, the truly deeply influential people in any field, politics, business, arts, science, even complex personal relationships. They are rarely, if ever, the ones who consistently shout the loudest, interrupt the most, or dominate conversations through sheer overwhelming volume. They are far more often the ones who possess the profound wisdom, the cultivated discipline to speak only when truly necessary, only when their words will have maximum undeniable impact, only when the conditions are perfectly ripe for their intervention. They are the ones who masterfully, almost theatrically, utilize strategic pauses, allowing pregnant resonant silence itself to speak powerfully for them to create tension, to command attention, to amplify the weight of their subsequent words. They are the ones who demonstrate the remarkable, often unsettling capacity to comfortably, confidently endure the void, the uncomfortable, pregnant silence without feeling the compulsive, anxious need to immediately fill it with nervous chatter, defensive justifications, or meaningless platitudes. Because therein lies the absolute, undeniable key to this silent power. Most people fundamentally, deeply, almost primordially fear silence. They instinctively, desperately rush to fill any perceived void, any conversational lull with words, often meaningless, reactive, anxiety-driven words, primarily because silence makes them feel profoundly insecure, uncomfortably exposed, terrifyingly uncertain, as if their very existence is being questioned or ignored. But the individual who consciously, deliberately learns to master silence, to become comfortable, even powerful within it, inherently, almost automatically gains psychological mastery, unspoken dominance over those who fear it, over those who are enslaved by their need for noise. Think about any recent argument, any tense discussion, any high-stakes negotiation you may have experienced or witnessed. What genuinely, truly would have happened if instead of immediately, predictably reacting, defensively, impulsively, firing back with counter-arguments, justifications, or emotional outbursts, you had consciously, deliberately chosen to remain strategically, powerfully silent? If you had simply, calmly, with unwavering composure, allowed the other person to completely, utterly wear themselves out verbally, to expend their emotional energy, to perhaps even drown in their own excessive, uncontrolled verbiage, inadvertently, foolishly exposing their own weaknesses, their inconsistencies, their underlying fears, their true agenda. In their unbridled, unthinking, emotional outpouring, you likely would have realized, perhaps with startling, paradigm-shifting clarity, that many times the best, most effective, most powerful response is actually no response at all. That frequently simply letting the other person speak themselves out, allowing them to fully expend their emotional energy without receiving the reactive fuel, the emotional validation, the argumentative engagement they crave and expect, is the single most effective, most disarming, most powerful way to subtly yet profoundly dismantle their attack, neutralize their aggression, and often regain control of the dynamic. And here is the crucial, often unarticulated part that no one typically tells you explicitly, the hidden gem within this strategy. Strategic silence is not only a potent, often devastating tool for exerting subtle, unspoken control over others, it is perhaps even more fundamentally, more transformatively, a powerful tool for achieving profound, unshakable control over yourself. When you cultivate, through conscious, dedicated practice, the inner capacity, the emotional discipline to consistently stay quiet when provoked, to consciously hold back your impulsive, reactive retorts, to deliberately choose when and how to act, to speak, rather than being driven like a puppet by fleeting, volatile emotion, you instantly, demonstrably become psychologically stronger, more resilient, more formidable than perhaps 99% of the people around you. Why? Because most individuals tragically exist as unwitting, unthinking slaves to their own emotions, their own conditioned reactions. They react without thinking, they speak without considering, they allow themselves to be easily, predictably carried away by surges of anger, frustration, fear, insecurity, or wounded pride. And precisely in that moment of losing internal control, of surrendering to reactivity, they inevitably, irretrievably lose their true power, their genuine agency. Authentic, sustainable power is not found in superficially, fleetingly winning every single argument, in having the last word in every petty squabble. It resides fundamentally, unshakably in possessing the profound wisdom, the strategic foresight to know when not to even have those arguments in the first place, when to disengage from unwinnable or unproductive battles. It lies in consciously, deliberately refusing to fall into others' manipulative games, their emotional traps, their predictable provocations. It is found in the cultivated capacity to calmly, dispassionately observe, without necessarily being observed, revealing your own hand, your own strategy. In choosing to act decisively, powerfully, precisely when no one expects it, when your opponents are complacent or distracted. In moving with calculated, almost invisible precision, while others are helplessly, chaotically drowning in the distracting, disorienting noise of their own uncontrolled reactivity. And perhaps the best part, the most empowering aspect of mastering this silent art, when you genuinely, consistently learn to strategically stay silent, when you master the subtle, potent art of patiently waiting for the precisely opportune moment, when you develop the unwavering discipline to carefully, consciously measure each word that leaves your mouth, ensuring it serves a specific, strategic purpose, the world, almost paradoxically, often starts to really listen to you when you do choose to speak. Why? Because what is scarce, what is rare, inherently almost universally possesses more perceived value. Because what is not explicitly constantly said, what is held back, what is implied, often creates an intriguing, compelling mystery. And mystery undeniably holds a unique, potent, almost irresistible form of power. So, the very next time you feel that almost irresistible, deeply ingrained internal need to speak arise, whether to defend your fragile ego, to explain your actions meticulously, to correct a perceived slight, or simply to fill an uncomfortable, pregnant silence, pause, take a conscious breath. Ask yourself critically, honestly, with strategic intent, do I really need to say this right now? Will these words truly serve my long-term objective? Or could my strategic resonant silence perhaps say much, much more, achieve a far greater impact, preserve my power more effectively? The answer frequently, if you are truly honest with yourself, will surprise you. And if you learn to consciously, consistently use that answer, that power of strategic, purposeful silence, it possesses the profound, undeniable potential to change your life, your relationships, your influence, your very destiny forever. And here is where we enter the truly most interesting, most sophisticated, most nuanced part of this strategic game, the deeper, often hidden layers of this unspoken art. It is simply not enough merely to master the art of knowing when to be silent. It is not enough to merely achieve proficiency in wielding silence itself as a tool of observation or defense. There exists a deeper, more potent layer of strategic awareness. One that almost no one fully understands, let alone consciously, consistently employs the profound, almost alchemical power of strategic invisibility, of calculated absence. Because ultimate sustainable influence, the kind that endures, the kind that shapes events from behind the scenes, is often not just about what you say, or even what you consciously, deliberately choose not to say. It is equally, perhaps even more significantly, about strategically, masterfully managing when you consciously, visibly exist in others' awareness in their psychological landscape, and crucially, when you deliberately, strategically choose to psychologically, perceptually disappear from their immediate radar, becoming an unknown, unpredictable variable. And yes, this concept, this notion of deliberately cultivating absence may initially sound strange, perhaps even counterintuitive, especially in a world that screams for constant visibility, for perpetual self-promotion. But it represents the absolute, undeniable key for those rare individuals who genuinely seek to truly, subtly, effectively control situations, to shape outcomes often entirely without direct confrontation, without overt struggle. Think again with a critical historical eye about the truly great strategists, the master manipulators, the enduring figures of power throughout history. Were they typically the individuals constantly, conspicuously positioned at the noisy, chaotic center of everything, demanding attention, micromanaging every detail, visibly involved in every minor skirmish, every petty dispute? Or were they, far more often, the ones who possessed the profound wisdom, the unwavering discipline, the strategic patience to know how to strategically, almost magically disappear when necessary, when the time was not ripe for action, when observation from the shadows was more advantageous, the ones who skillfully, patiently let others, the more impulsive, the more reactive, the more short-sighted, wear themselves out, expend their energy, reveal their weaknesses, frantically reacting to the immediate noise, the surface chaos, the manipulated diversions, while they, the true strategists, quietly, patiently, almost invisibly, moved decisively, powerfully in the shadows, preparing their masterstroke. True, enduring, almost unshakable power is rarely, if ever, held by those individuals who feel the compulsive, insecure need to always be visibly present, constantly, loudly asserting their authority forever, reminding everyone of their existence, their importance, It is far more often, far more securely possessed by those who have mastered the subtle, potent, almost paradoxical art of strategically, consciously managing their very presence, their visibility, their accessibility. Consider this fundamental psychological principle. When you appear too often, too predictably, too readily, almost desperately available, you inevitably, unavoidably become predictable. You risk becoming mere routine, an expected part of the familiar, unexciting background noise, and routine, familiarity, inherent predictability, almost universally loses perceived value, loses its impact, diminishes its allure over time. However, when you consciously, deliberately learn how to strategically, temporarily disappear, perhaps by temporarily withdrawing your attention, your focus, your energy from a particular situation or individual, by reducing your immediate accessibility, your constant availability, by creating intentional, calculated space, a void where your presence once was, when you learn to make your active presence, your input, your wisdom, scarce calculated, intentional, you paradoxically, almost magically become perceived as much more valuable, much more significant, much more impactful, much more desirable when you do choose to reappear, when you do choose to intervene, when you do choose to speak. Absence strategically deployed makes the heart and the mind grow fonder, or at least more attentive. And this powerful, counterintuitive principle applies with remarkable consistency across almost every domain of human endeavor. In the world of business and consulting, the consultant who is always eagerly available, who responds instantly to every beck and call, often commands less respect, less authority, and consequently lower fees than the elusive sought-after expert whose time is scarce, whose insights are perceived as precious, whose availability is a privilege, not a given. In the complex, often fraught dynamics of romantic relationships, the partner who smothers the other with constant, overwhelming presence with incessant demands for attention and reassurance often inadvertently, tragically diminishes attraction, kills desire, breeds resentment, while the one who maintains a degree of healthy, intriguing independence, who cultivates a sense of mystery, who isn't always predictable or readily available, often sustains desire, maintains interest, fosters a sense of longing. In the broader stage of life itself, consistent, unrelenting overexposure, the desperate need to be always on, often breeds contempt, indifference, or simple weary saturation. The truly most respected, most influential leaders, the ones whose words carry real weight, whose decisions shape destinies, are rarely the ones who feel the insecure need to speak authoritatively at every single meeting, constantly filling the air with their voice simply to assert their dominance, to remind everyone of their position. They are far more often the ones who speak only when truly strategically necessary, the ones who meticulously, patiently choose their moments to intervene with almost surgical precision, with maximum undeniable impact, often after a period of quiet observation and deep reflection. Think again of the almost mythical aura surrounding Steve Jobs. He didn't frantically, desperately launch mediocre, uninspired products every single week, flooding the market with noise. He patiently, meticulously, almost obsessively took his time, often years in relative seclusion, building anticipation, cultivating mystery, and when he finally did speak, when he finally did emerge from the shadows to reveal his latest creation, the entire world captivated, listened breathlessly, attentively. Miyamoto Musashi. The master swordsman didn't foolishly, recklessly seek out unnecessary, pointless fights simply to prove his prowess, to display his skill. He often remained strategically, intentionally in the shadows, observing, waiting, conserving his energy until the absolutely exact opportune moment arose to act decisively, lethally. Leonardo da Vinci, the quintessential Renaissance man, famously, sometimes infuriatingly for his patrons, spent years, sometimes decades, immersed in silent, solitary, almost obsessive work on his multifaceted, groundbreaking ideas, and when his creations, his insights finally emerged, often after long periods of perceived inactivity, the world inevitably profoundly stood still in awe. But most people simply don't get it. Most people, driven by primal anxieties, operate primarily, almost exclusively, from a deep-seated, often unconscious fear of being forgotten, of becoming irrelevant, of fading into insignificance. They mistakenly, tragically believe that if they are not always visibly present, not constantly loudly participating in the ongoing conversation, not persistently, desperately reminding everyone of their existence, their opinions, their achievements, they will simply inevitably disappear from significance, be erased from memory. And to some extent, in a superficial, fleeting sense, they might be right. The world is noisy, attention is scarce. But what they fundamentally disastrously fail to understand is that strategic, intentional, calculated forgetfulness by others, the temporary absence from their immediate awareness, can actually be skillfully, powerfully wielded as a potent tool of influence, not merely passively, fearfully suffered as a punishment or a sign of failure. If you consciously, deliberately learn how to disappear intentionally, if you master the subtle, profound art of knowing when to strategically retreat, when to withdraw from the fray, and precisely when and how to powerfully, impactfully return, you effectively, almost invisibly control the narrative surrounding your presence and your absence. You subtly, yet powerfully control how you are perceived by others. You skillfully, almost magically create an aura of mystery, of unpredictability, of quiet confidence that often makes you appear far more powerful, far more intriguing, far more formidable than those individuals who are constantly, exhaustingly, desperately shouting for attention, clamoring for validation, terrified of being overlooked. And this cultivated capacity for strategic withdrawal, for intentional invisibility, goes far beyond mere silence. It fundamentally, absolutely requires control over yourself, particularly over the pervasive, corrosive modern affliction of impatience. Because to disappear strategically, to operate effectively, powerfully from the shadows, to bide your time until the perfect moment, you absolutely, unequivocally need something that most people today in our hyper-accelerated, instant gratification obsessed world tragically, disastrously lack: profound, unwavering, almost superhuman patience. We inhabit a world, a culture utterly, dangerously obsessed with immediacy, with instant results, with constant stimulation, where everyone seems to demand instant gratification, where everyone desperately, anxiously seeks instant validation, instant feedback, instant recognition. But those rare, truly powerful individuals, the ones who truly deeply dominate the long game, the ones who shape not just moments but eras implicitly, profoundly understand something absolutely fundamental, something almost spiritual. Time itself is a weapon. If you possess the inner fortitude, the steely resolve, the unwavering discipline to patiently wait, to observe, to gather information, to allow conditions to ripen, if you can consistently, successfully resist the powerful, almost overwhelming urge to react immediately, impulsively, emotionally, if you possess the strategic foresight, the grand vision to plan long-term, while others are frantically, myopically carried away by short-term urgency, by fleeting crises, by manufactured dramas, you have effectively, often decisively, already won the deeper, more significant battle before the overt, visible conflict even truly fully begins. Patience in this context represents arguably the highest, most potent form of psychological power, precisely because it is so rare, so difficult to cultivate, so countercultural in our hyper-accelerated, distractible world, while others inevitably, predictably rush headlong into poorly considered actions, into emotional reactions, into strategic blunders. You remain strategically, powerfully still observing, learning, waiting, while others desperately, anxiously seek fleeting, superficial, quick gratification, chasing ephemeral highs. You patiently, deliberately, quietly build something solid, meaningful, impactful, designed to last, designed to endure. Patience, therefore, becomes the very mother of control over your own impulsive, often self-sabotaging reactions. Control over your strategic positioning within your environment, within the game. Ultimately, profound, unspoken control over how others perceive you, react to you, and ultimately often follow you. And here is the crucial, often overlooked psychological key that unlocks this level of mastery. People instinctively, almost primordially fear, or at least are deeply unsettled by those individuals. They cannot easily read those whose actions, reactions, and motivations do not conform to predictable, easily decipherable patterns. If someone insults you, provokes you, attacks you, and you respond immediately, predictably, with anger, defensiveness, or justification, they have, on a fundamental psychological level, already won. They successfully elicited a reaction. They effectively took control of your emotional state. They confirmed their power over you. But if you instead consciously, deliberately choose to remain calmly, enigmatically silent, if you simply dispassionately watch them without moving, without betraying emotion, without offering them the satisfaction of a visible reaction. If you deliberately, strategically let them consume themselves, flail uselessly in their own impotent rage, their own uncontrolled emotional outburst without giving them anything tangible in return, do you know what inevitably, almost universally happens? They become utterly bewildered. They feel psychologically exposed, vulnerable, disarmed because they expected resistance. They anticipated you defending yourself. They were prepared for a fight. But when you consciously, powerfully give them nothing, when you meet their aggression, their provocation with serene, unreadable emptiness, you effectively instantly take away their power, their script, their control over the dynamic. People inherently, psychologically hate the void, the vacuum, the unanswered question. They possess an almost desperate, deeply ingrained psychological need for answers, for reactions, for feedback, for some form of echo, some acknowledgement, simply to validate their own existence, their own impact, their own perceived power. But when you consciously, strategically learn to deny them that expected validation, when you master the subtle, powerful art of giving them only what you strategically, deliberately decide to give, when you control the flow of information and emotional response, you instantly, profoundly become someone they simply cannot control, cannot predict, cannot easily manipulate. And that inherent cultivated uncontrollability, that enigmatic unpredictability, is the very essence, the core of real, enduring, unspoken power. Becoming strategically unreachable, not because you are physically hiding in fear, cowering from the world, but because you consciously, deliberately choose when to be present and when not to be, when to engage and when to withdraw, because you intentionally, powerfully become unpredictable, unreadable in your responses, in your timing, because you fundamentally, masterfully control the intricate, often invisible game of silence, time, patience, and strategic invisibility. So the profound, life-altering question now becomes intensely personal, deeply challenging. Can you cultivate the inner discipline, the unwavering resolve, the profound self-mastery required to endure the often uncomfortable crucible of patience? Can you learn to comfortably, powerfully endure the pregnant void of silence without compulsively, anxiously filling it with unnecessary, often weakening noise? Can you strategically, purposefully disappear from the stage when necessary? When observation from the wings is more advantageous, and then purposefully, powerfully return, with even greater strength, with heightened impact, precisely when the moment is perfect, when your intervention will be most decisive. Because if you can learn to do this, if you can achieve conscious, deliberate control over your own presence and absence, over your own reactions and silences, then you possess something invaluable, something profoundly powerful, something that most people, in their restless, reactive urgency, will likely never ever attain: true, authentic, unspoken, almost invisible power.